Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Trident's Marketing Communications Manager, Daniel Sloan, and we're excited to be bringing you today's Culture of Research and Education webinar called Data Collection Solutions for Applied Research. The core webinar series is designed to provide faculty, students, and alumni an opportunity to share their research and scholarship with the Trident community. By fostering a culture of professional development and idea exchange, participants will have access to a valuable forum for lifelong learning. This university-wide effort is coordinated by Trident's doctoral studies directors. A few notes for everyone before we get into today's presentation. You're welcome to ask questions at any time. You can find the question box on the right-hand side of your screen about halfway down, and you can submit comments, insight there, and whatever. And because the Q&A session, we like to make sure that it's a good kind of back and forth. And and do your best to try to stick to the subject matter of the webinar. But if you do have other questions, send them in there, and we'll address those offline. And everyone's muted, so just submit your questions in the question box, and that's how we'll get to them. And just try to avoid raising your hand because it's harder for us to communicate with you that way. This webinar will be recorded, and everyone in attendance will receive a link to the recording and a copy of the slides by early next week. And I want to introduce today's host and one of our presenters, Dr. Indira Guzman, who's Doctoral Director of our Glenn Jones College of Business. She joined Trident in 2006 and started out as Professor of IT Management. She's been a faculty member, dissertation mentor, and her research has been published in over 50 academic outlets. And just a note, she will be the Doctor of Consortium Co-Chair at the 2019 America's Conference on Information Systems in Mexico in August. So welcome, Dr. Guzman, and I'm going to hand things off to you to introduce our other presenter and to begin today's webinar. So take it away.
Thank you very much, Daniel, for the introduction, and thank you everyone for attending this webinar. I would like to introduce Dr. Christopher Linski. He is the Professor of Doctoral Studies for the DBA program, and he started working for Trident not long ago. It's less than a year, but he already started creating relationships and helping doctoral students, and I'm very happy to have him today. As his background, as you can see, Dr. Linski began his professional background with the military service during the global war on terrorism and Operation Iraqi Freedom. After retiring, he began work as a civilian employee for the Department of Defense. His passion for military veterans continued through the creation of a student veteran organization and a transitioning veterans organization. He is also an executive officer for the Veterans of Foreign Affairs. Dr. Linski has completed his doctorate in management and postdoctorate in higher education leadership from Colorado Tech University. His technical expertise includes undergraduate, graduate, and doctoral programs mostly in topics like criminal justice, homeland security, business management, executive leadership, and general research methods. So this is actually a good topic and expertise that Dr. Linski has. So welcome, Dr. Linski, and thanks again for agreeing to organize this webinar.
Thank you, Dr. Guzman. It's a pleasure and an honor to be here, and I look forward to providing some wonderful information for our participants.
Okay, so in this webinar, we are going to discuss, we're going to focus on applied research. And one of the things I wanted to highlight here before we start the discussion is why is this topic important. So we chose to discuss this topic mostly because our students in the DBA program, which is our newer doctoral program at Trident University, are required to conduct research, applied research for their doctoral study project, but it also we have some PhD students who are doing some qualitative research. So the focus of this webinar today is really qualitative research. And it's very important because in general, as you know, all the doctoral work, either for PhD or for DBA, require empirical data. So they are empirical studies. So that means we require data. And in this particular webinar, we are focusing on applied research. So why, again, this topic is important? Try to summarize here some aspects. First, because of the empirical nature, we refer to data, we collect data, and we doctoral students, it's the foundation to make the statements and to describe the findings. I mean, we initially start with some kind of problem, a real life problem, and then we look for data to identify solutions. So that is, those are some of the reasons: the issue of empirical data, the aspect of applied research in using real-world evidence, that's specifically to the DBA program, and finally, the nature of this kind of webinars that aim to help doctoral students, and specifically, we want to focus on that aspect. Now, there's a lot to cover when it comes to dealing with data. You know, we can start with collecting, analyzing, describing, writing results. I mean, there are just many good topics that could be identified as a result. But we try to emphasize today on how to collect data for qualitative research. So again, we can always organize other webinars, and we will appreciate your questions and ideas for future webinars. But let us discuss today how to collect data for applied research in qualitative studies.
All right, so of course, when we're dealing with applied research, it's important to examine what potential designs we have. Most of you, by this point, hopefully know the difference between qualitative and quantitative methods. In general, quantitative methods is looking more at numbers and statistical analysis of data to provide a finding, usually through hypotheses. Qualitative data really looks at a human component. We want to find out how experiences relate to real-world environments. And so what we've provided here are 3 of the prominent designs that we often use in our doctoral study project for the DBA program. The first is a case study. A case study essentially provides a single organization, sometimes multiple organizations, where you look at how the topic is orchestrated, conducted, or impacts a single organization. There's a very structured process of data collection for a case study, which we're not going to go into the details of each of these designs today. Action research is more of a cycle of review, implementation of change, reflection of change, finding out how to increase or improve each iteration of the cycle to make the final product the best that it can be in a general sense. And then process improvement really is about some intervention that allows you to go into an organization and improve something about a procedure that is orchestrated across the organization. These are not the only qualitative method designs. So if you do look at qualitative research, you're going to find a lot of things about phenomenology, which really gets in deep about human experiences. Descriptive, where we simply analyze what is going on and describe it. These are more of a not applied research necessarily. You can provide some of those backgrounds in order to create an applied research study. Before our doctoral study project, we really focus on these 3 prominent designs. Now, it's important that we just discover which design we're going to use first, because that will determine which data collection techniques are best available for that type of design.
Now, Dr. Linski described the most common research methods used in qualitative research. And it's very important to use the literature that will guide you in that process. I mean, we do not have to discover things and do things, start from scratch, because there's a lot of literature on methodologies, and scientific methodologies that can be used for research. So our job, I mean the doctoral student job when you're doing this applied research, is use the appropriate literature, and of course the emphasis on those methods that Dr. Linski just described are based in the coursework that we offer at Trident in our DBA program. But there are other methodologies, and in any case, we expect the student to become really familiar and really comfortable with any research design, so you can apply that to your study with a good foundation. But from a practical perspective, when you determine, okay, what are going to be the sources of data, you want to consider the access to participants. I mean, that's really important, to the right participants in order to answer the right research question, right? You have a research question, you have a problem, a business problem that needs to be solved, and but you need to collect empirical data from participants who are able to talk about the problem, participants who are able to tell you about the problem, that have that knowledge, that have that background. And that means the access to participants means being able to meet with the participant criteria, and that's why we know that there has to be some kind of initial negotiation between the researchers and the participants to determine, okay, what kind of access is allowed. And during coursework, we actually require this letter of intent, that it's to protect the researcher, the doctoral student, as well as the organization. I mean, it's very important to respect the privacy, confidentiality of the participants, and that's something that, again, it should be also agreed up front, so the student doesn't face access problems later. So the access to the participants is very important, meeting the participant criteria, answering the research question with participant background, access to the site, we already mentioned that, and that access to the site, as I said, it's better if it's in writing. That's why we require this letter of intent later in the program, not at the very beginning, it's later, but before the proposal. And of course, there are going to be some kind of scope and time issues, and that has to do with the project management. If we want to follow the timeline of the dissertation, then the scope and the time are very important. I mean, you don't want to commit to something that it requires years of data collection. If you have to spend 1 year conducting your research, the time that will be used for data collection should be something that is within that time frame. You know, it's very important to consider the time, as well as all the ethical concerns, and that's something that you have during the IRB training, as well as the IRB application. But we emphasize a lot during coursework on the ethical concerns related to any type of research. In addition, we also should consider participant engagement, and that has to do with the type of communication that is needed with the participants of the research. Either the type of communication is it's virtual, over the phone, and face-to-face. Of course, that's the ideal one, I would say. Since you are taking a real organization, that's the ideal one. But we know that reality hits us, and in some cases that's not possible. But that's part of the research design. I mean, the more we plan in advance, the better. The informed consent capability, I mean, that again is another document that the more details are provided in the informed consent about the expectations, the better. Just to give you an example, if you are saying that you're going to interview somebody in 20 minutes, never use more than those 20 minutes, because participants should be respected in not only confidentiality, integrity, but also the expectations. I mean, we all want to be respectful with their time. So if you say something, please make sure you follow that. That's important. And same thing if you're going to have different types of data elicited from the participants, then you want to put those expectations up front, because it's possible that you want, in addition to the opinions of the participant, you may want some kind of document of from the participant or additional information. And of course, considering if there are going to be a combination of sources, which again should be planned in advance.
And that was one of the more important concepts as we start looking at already understanding design and how that design is going to play out throughout our doctoral project and or dissertation, is determining what instrument is going to be best utilized to collect the data necessary to meet your research question. And that's really one of the more important notes, is that you don't just create an instrument because it's the easiest way to do it. It has to be something that provides relevant data from the participants that have that knowledge and background so that they can answer your research questions with the provided information. Some of the most common instruments for primary data for qualitative is interviews. All right, this is a human topic, and we want you to talk to people. And the easiest way to do that is sit down, either face-to-face or virtually or on the phone, and have a conversation. There are different ways of setting up interview protocols to script out that communication, and we'll get into that in a little bit. Focus groups are very similar to the interview process, except instead of doing a one-on-one conversation, you do it in a group format. And that group format really focuses on dialogue or conversation between the participants, instead of just between the researcher and a single individual. Another instrument is observational protocols. We like to do observations, but we often forget that we need some kind of foundation to tell us or keep us on track with what we're observing and taking notes about what it is that we have observed. And so a protocol really provides that script, not necessarily of conversation, but where am I observing? Who am I observing? Why am I observing? And then providing all of those notes related to actually conducting the observation itself. Now, one of the most common instruments is questionnaires. The questionnaire, for qualitative purposes, must provide open-ended questions. Participants need to be able to explain themselves. This can provide information that is quantitative in nature, as long as it's followed up with qualitative information that can be analyzed to meet those research questions. Another area of instruments for data collection is called secondary data. Now, secondary data just means that you're not going out and finding something new. Instead, you're going to collect something from someone else that's already collected that information. Most often, it's considered company data records or archival information. This can often be on governmental websites, statistics, demographic information about your topic, multiple areas of whatever records would substantiate the qualitative information that you've received. It's important to note that in most studies, especially in the DBA program, is going to require multiple instruments in order to collect enough data to answer your research questions. And then Dr. Guzman is going to provide some more notes on common instruments.
Okay, so on those instruments, I mean, we're trying to elicit data, collect data. There are most questions. I mean, we have some examples at the end of this presentation that we will discuss from our own research that will show you some specific, real examples used in research when asking questions from participants. And you will see that those questions are mostly open-ended. They really have to capture the participants' perceptions and knowledge about the specific issue that you are studying. So the questions have to be worded in a way that they elicit the participants' opinion, knowledge, but not your own. And I think that's very important and tricky sometimes, because the researcher could be even considered the instrument in him or herself. I mean, the researcher needs to be prepared to capture that from the participants. So it shouldn't be your opinion as the researcher, it should be the participants' opinion, knowledge, feelings, perceptions. I mean, that's what we are trying to elicit, right, to answer the research question. So that kind of preparation is really important, and we're going to discuss that. But we are really, we have to be ready to listen to those ideas, and in some cases there could be some numerical data, but that is not necessarily the main focus of, again, in a qualitative study. That's not a focus, but there could be some numerical data. That doesn't mean it shouldn't be there. Now the notes are part of the protocols. Here we have that these do not count as additional sources, but as Dr. Linski was saying, there is what the researcher is capturing, is absorbing during the data collection is important, and it should document it. I mean, I always tell students, once you have the IRB approval, I mean, you did all your planning, you did all your proposal with all the design, something up front prepared, but once you go out there and you start collecting data, that's one of the most beautiful parts of doing research, to actually go and collect data. But you should be ready to document everything, to make this your field notes. I mean, it's document everything, and be ready to do so. I mean, remember that a good project, a good dissertation or doctoral study project, the document is something that could be replicated. So that means something that it's well written and it has captured all the details of the process. And since that process is so important, of course, the planning and the instruments that you prepare in advance should have this focus. I mean, the target is answer your research question. I mean, you can have other interesting ideas, but you want to focus on answering the research question, and that has to do with the different concepts or in general the topic, but try to narrow down and focus and emphasize on answering that research question. And something important that you have in this slide as well is that depending on other situations that you may face, you have a supporting foundation here at the university, where we are here to help you if you have questions. Make sure you ask. If you don't ask us, we won't know.
Now we really get into a question on how do we actually create these instruments. Even if we've decided which instruments are best suited for collecting data, the actual creation of instruments is one of the hardest part of qualitative research for doctoral students, because we don't often get the chance to create a lot of instruments prior to the doctoral study project or the dissertation. Instead, it's something that most of us, this is our very first time ever writing a question that someone has to answer out loud, or designing a survey or a questionnaire that you may not be able to provide feedback. If you provide it online, will the participants understand what it is that you're trying to say? And so we have to figure out how to create the instrument, because the requirement is that it's created by the researcher. There are areas of modification of instruments that have been created, but ultimately you have to look at, is it going to answer your research question? And chances are in qualitative research, if you're taking another instrument, it's going to answer someone else's research question. And that means that it's probably not going to be yours. And so how do we adapt someone else's, or use it as a framework? And that's kind of what we're going to show you today with our examples, is that sometimes you just have to provide a framework of how to do it, so that you can actually start putting those questions in, interviews, observations, etc. But we have to really consider the time and scope. How long does the instrument need to be? How many questions do you want your participant to answer before they get tired of answering your questions? Or they simply stop answering your questions, especially when it comes to online questionnaires. If you get too far or take too long, your participants may not provide relevant data anymore. They may instead simply try to hurry up and get done. And so we have to make sure that we're balancing those requirements. And again, if we haven't repeated this, all right, you have to make sure that what you do collect relates back to your research question. And so generally, that's how we're looking at it. But Dr. Guzman's going to explain how to create some of those protocols specifically.
Well, here we have general ideas about the protocols, and as we said, we have examples at the end. But the protocol is that, a guide, a physical script that should outline the activities that the researcher will follow. So it's really the more detailed and the better prepared the protocol is, the better your research is going to go. So make sure you prepare that in advance, you discuss that, and even test it in advance. The protocol, you can have the protocol for an interview, and depending on the type of interview, which could be structured, semi-structured, or unstructured, you still want to have this protocol that focuses on individuals' responses. So it's directed to an individual, and there are details on how you talk to the individual depending on what kind of interview you are doing. A structure means more closed-ended questions. The unstructured is the one that really is open to more open questions to the participants, which of course opens to more reactions and listening to what the participant says. But you still want to have in your protocol some guidelines on how to go depending on what the answer is. In terms of the focus groups, Dr. Linski already explained what they are, but again, in the protocol, you also want to prevent potential situations that will happen due to the whole group interaction. Okay, you have a group interaction, what happens if they have very different ideas among the participants? Or in that case, how do you wrap it up to move to the next point? Or if there is enough consensus, then how do you move to what next point? So again, those kind of details. In terms of observational, having those tables with the protocol again that will guide the researcher and how to collect data. I mean, what is it you're observing? Is it you're observing the behavior? Are you observing the order of things? The sequence of things? Are you observing the people? I mean, you again want to have that clear to know what the focus of your research is, so you don't waste time in what is not needed. You want to spend your time and energy on the things that will help you answer the research question. And as I mentioned before, any research is good if it allows good replication, so all needs to be documented.
So moving on to questionnaires, Questionnaires, of course, is a set of questions posed to your participants, but there's multiple ways of providing questionnaires. And in fact, questionnaires can be done face-to-face. But most often you're looking at a questionnaire of physical documents where someone's actually filling out a piece of paper or doing the same thing virtually, usually through an online process. These are usually open-ended questions, but they have to be relevant. Again, providing questions that ask people to talk about themselves, right? This is a human related study. We want people to explain how it is that their experience with this topic can assist you in answering your research question. The open-ended questions are necessary because it allows that individual to expand on a question. If we ask yes or no questions, if we ask Likert scale questions, then we only get a little bit of data. We get data that points us to a direction. The open-ended questions allow us for an in-depth look. Now, questionnaires, we expect that participants are not going to open up as detailed as they would in an interview, right? Questionnaires are usually more of an open-ended short answer. They're going to provide you maybe a paragraph per. You can ask for more, but remember, we're really creating our instruments so that it makes the job of the participants easier in the process. One of the most important aspects of questionnaires, but also any instrument creation, is what is the wording that we use and what is the order that we use. When we provide certain words to a question, how well do you like something? We expect the answer to be something about them liking it, right? It's something that we lead the participant to, and we don't want to do that in academic research. And so we have to be careful that what we say in the questionnaire doesn't automatically lead them to an answer, even if that answer is not necessarily true. The order can also be important, but the order of how we integrate those numerical or quantitative aspects of a questionnaire. You may ask someone to answer a Likert scale on a scale of 1 to 5. How significant was this event? And they answer. And then you have to ask why. Of course, you don't want to ask the question why first. It wouldn't make sense. The participant would be confused. So that order is really important to make sure that the participants follow a flow chart, essentially, of where you're directing them in terms of getting from the beginning to the end and still providing quality data that stays on track and doesn't lead to tangents. In questionnaires, you don't have the capability of stopping someone or kind of redirecting them if they get off on a tangent. And you don't know that until after you receive your questionnaire responses. And so we have to make sure that we provide a questionnaire that tries to detract from those branching off from the topic. Just note, for purposes of data collection for the sources of data required for the DBA program, if you just ask demographic questions and then those questions are going to be, could be easily asked during an interview, it doesn't provide a second or third type of data. So just note that no qualitative data is being collected. You're not asking an open-ended question. So it really doesn't fit into the questionnaires that's used, even though it can be used as a subsequent type of data. And so our next for Dr. Guzman will be on secondary data.
Well, in the DBA program, we require at least 3 different sources of data to really give the students different perspectives about the problem, the business problem, the real problem. And one of those could be secondary data, or more than one could be the use of secondary data. Secondary data is the one that you don't directly collect from the participant, so it's something that has been already collected. And of course, that means it means that you are either finding it, that because it's already available, open and freely available, or otherwise that you are requesting from the company, from somebody in the company. So again, it has been already collected. So that's secondary data. It's not the one you collected directly. Now, it could be public, as I said, many public organizations, government organizations have it available, and it's available on the web, it's available on the website. So that's something that usually it's not a problem. But if it's if there's any potential issue of privacy, of course, then you need the permission, the appropriate permission to use the data. In some cases, it could be available through the representative, or it could be, as I said, the official records, government publications. So again, those are just examples of secondary data. In terms of where to find it, it could be online, or it could be, again, that the company has it and you can request that data, but always explaining why and how you're going to use it. That's what companies need to know as well, how you're going to use the data. And some companies may have more reservations about how you use or publish their data. And that's, again, something that we ask students to negotiate in advance, make this whole process transparent to the organization, and use the scientific approach, meaning that you document everything and that you cite wherever the things need to be cited, always giving credit to the authors for everything. If it's not coming from your brain, you always cite wherever it's coming from. You use data from the organization, you say it's coming from the organization, it's coming from an opinion, it's coming from an archive, it's coming from an open website. You always want to say where things are coming from. And of course, some of these secondary data could be quantitative or qualitative. And the main purpose is that once you answer your research question, you want to triangulate, meaning, look at the problem from different perspectives, and maybe this secondary data can give you an initial macro approach of the problem, or can help you understand the implications of the problem. I mean, that's the kind of triangulation, and just look at the problem from different perspectives and explain and expand on the analysis of this problem from that perspective. So let's move on to the next topic of reliability of those instruments, and then we're going to discuss the examples.
All right, so reliability of instruments is important in every study. What reliability does is ensures that the data you're collecting is the data that you need, but it also makes sure to reduce some of the concerns, such as bias, both on the researcher and on the participants. And there's two prominent approaches for qualitative reliability. The first is what you can do before submitting to IRB, because you're not going to collect data with this. And that's an expert review of your instruments. Now, an expert review can't just be a single person. You need at least two people who have a terminal degree, so they understand doctoral research, and they have to have relevant experience. So think of content experts that can make sure that if you're asking a question, the participant would understand it in the terms of their field. Sometimes we use things like jargon that is field specific that may not be applicable to all participants. And we want to make sure that it is readable by the participants, understood by the participants. And so what an expert reviewer does is simply reviews the question as an expert and says, this question didn't make sense, I would reword this, this sentence may lead the participants. And so they really just conduct that and provide you with feedback on how to improve the instrument. And that's the most important thing, is what we do after we receive that feedback. And we're going to talk about that in a moment. The second approach is a pilot study. A pilot study actually requires data collection, so it's completed after the IRB process, or when you've been approved to conduct human subject research. This is conducted by at least 2 or more participants who meet the study requirements, right? So they have to understand what you're talking about. They would essentially do the study for you, and then you're going to take that information on how well they did, right? Were they confused? Did they ask you questions about what does this mean? If you're in an interview, and you're actually interviewing these individuals, did the participant have to have the questions read in different ways? And that can help you modify those questions so that they're easily understood. The thing with a pilot study is that you actually have to take the time to collect the data. So it's not just the approach of did the participants understand the instrument, but you also analyze the information that you received. Did it make sense? If you got a whole bunch of information that has nothing to do with your topic, you may need to reframe your question or redirect participants earlier in an interview so that they stay on track. And these are all things that are important, because if you find out after you've already collected all of your data that the data doesn't match your research questions, then you're not going to be able to answer it in chapters 4 and 5. Next, we're going to talk about what do you do when you modify the instrument, right? So you have to take the feedback or your personal understanding of the concerns that your participants have had and determine if the instrument provided you with adequate data. If you couldn't find anything relevant to your research questions, then we need to modify. Right? Were they easily understood? Did everybody come out with the same answer? That may lead you to thinking that you provided leading information. Now, it may not always be leading, and that's something that you as a researcher have to decide. Maybe it truly is that everyone thought exactly the same way. But you have to take that, that information and do an analysis of your instrument to determine, could you rephrase that, and you might get different information from the questions if you were to change them. And then, of course, you have to modify the instrument itself to address that feedback. For your expert review, you modify that before you resubmit to your committee, before you go to your proposal defense, because, again, you're not collecting data. But in your pilot study, you have to address the feedback after you've already gotten your proposal approved. This means that in chapter 4, where you talk about the process of data collection, you then have to explain how you modify that instrument, because it will be slightly different from the instrument originally approved by your committee. If it's significant enough, if you have to change 50% of your questions, you may actually need to go back to your committee and you may need IRB to review those modifications. And those are things that we'll talk about on a case-by-case basis if that happens in your study. So now what we really want to get into, unfortunately briefly, but we're going to talk about some examples of the instruments just to give you an idea of how they can look. And most importantly, note that they are not ever going to look the same from study to study. So Dr. Guzman, please provide your examples.
Yep, they're not going to look the same from every participant. And just to add to the issues of bias, I mean, remember that we care about the truth, but by the truth we mean the lived truth of the participants, right? That's what we really want to capture. And people worry about bias, yes, that happens, but it's much as bias in other kinds of studies, even in quantitative. But in qualitative research, we really control for the bias by thinking and writing down all of your biases before we get started. So that's something that also helps for the reliability of the instrument. I mean, those are some of the things you want to think and write about. I mean, write is very important for doctoral programs. You have to write your ideas, write your design, write what you're thinking, write your review, I mean, write. But same thing here, you want to write your biases before you start conducting the interviews. that process makes it allows you to check yourselves, as you go, and the process is visible and unconscious, and that it can even be a part of the field notes, when you compare what happened. So do be ready to address that in advance. Now, this example that I put here is actually from my dissertation. When I wrote my dissertation many years ago, I did a mixed methodology study, but I also did a few studies before that that were qualitative in nature, and some consulting in information security. The one that I'm sharing here today, it was looking at the occupational culture of the IT people. My topic was, okay, I'm looking at the IT professionals, those who work in technology, and I was looking at the perception of new students, those who are just students, college students, and how do they, what do they know about this culture? I mean, they didn't work yet, they are maybe they have some internships, so they are new students, and my topic is, okay, what about the culture is, what do they know about the occupational culture? Is there something that it's understood before you start working in the field when you are just a student, or it's not understood? So if you see, one of the things that I remember, we already said that the questions have to be particular to your own study. But you see some of the little tips here is, first, I have the questions classified by sections. So you see the general questions at the beginning. Sometimes it's easier to ask the general questions because you want to make the participants start talking. If you ask a difficult question and the person is shy, then that's hard. So if you want to ask the questions that they have the answer to, if you're asking, do you know what the occupational culture is of IT professionals? And they're like, what? What are you talking? It's like maybe not the first question you want to start, but you're going to start, what's your internship position? Again, we were interviewing here students who were already in internships. So you start with the question that that they are doing an internship, and that they will be able to answer that question. So that's one trick. I start with the easy to answer questions. The other is to organize by areas. I mean, I was interested in this research on the perspectives about the IT occupation. So you see the personal perspective, the general perspective. These little headings are in bold specifically, so that you don't want to skip the questions, at least one question by area, because what happens once you are interviewing, especially in a log interview, is that you may end up skipping some questions, not just because it's the time, the opportunity, the situation, but also because the participant may have answered without you even asking, right? I mean, you're not going to ask what you already what the participant, it's like you're not paying attention to what I'm saying, right? You don't like that. So you want to make sure you have the sections and you are paying attention, so that the participant didn't already answer the question. And you see how I have in bold some of the keywords. So those are some of the things that I want to emphasize, because in some cases you can read the question, but in some you already prepared that you're not reading word by word. But if you skip the keyword, then you might skip the meaning, I mean the focus of your question. So again, the highlights, the bolds are for a reason. And then the other, you see the arrow that goes from top left to bottom right. That's really to help you with the sequence, because sometimes you tend to go all over the place, because depending on how the participant is talking. So again, that was another sequence. And very important to finish this slide is the final box in the bottom right, which is, do you have any question for me? And thank you. Because sometimes we are also in a rush and you forget to give the participant the opportunity to say something else or ask you. You're asking so much, and then maybe they are curious about something. So you want to give that opportunity as well. I mean, again, just open to remember that with this qualitative research, we really we want to capture the perspectives of the participants. That's why interviews are very popular, because they will allow you to learn the beliefs, the attitudes, the stories, experiences, perspectives, right? I mean, so many things that you want to capture, and sometimes they may want to tell you only the good stories, and that could be another problem. So you really want to provide an environment that would allow them to tell you a little bit of everything, especially, of course, with the focus on what you need and not their life. And that's another thing. You want to, know how to manage that so it's within your focus, not beyond. So let me see the next example. Okay, so the next example, and I apologize for the size of the document. We are going to share the material here, but it's not really the content what we want to share here, but the examples of the structure and some of the types of questions. But here, this one is actually I was participating in a research that was NSF funded by the National Science Foundation, and in this, it's actually a transcript. So this one doesn't include just the protocol. This one includes the answers already. And this one, every interview was like, I don't remember, maybe 14 or 20 pages every interview. But this one, I just included the first page because I wanted to emphasize how during this interview, in this case, we didn't ask the participants to answer demographic questions at the beginning. So it's really the interviewer, the researcher, who takes notes about what he or she is seeing. So first you see it's confidential research material, and then the interview number and who is interviewing, the initials of the person interviewing, the respondents, about the age, the gender, and the job they are doing. So these are some that comes from the observations. If you're not asking those questions and you're just going into the topic, and again, you will see how here you have some of the what do we say about the introduction, and then how do we transcribe even those responses with all the details, where you see even the ums and the pauses and the tones, to help you really capture what happened. And the next slide, I wanted to show you can just click on the entire slide. This was part of my dissertation, where I conducted, I had, oh no, this was actually before, yeah, because I had multiple studies there. But in this study, you see, we had a mixed method. In this case, we had qualitative first and then quantitative. So you see the qualitative phase, that's why it's mixed method. But even when you use mixed method, there has to be a reason and a purpose of using mixed methods. It's not just, okay, I want mixed methods. No, it has to be a reason. And in this case, the reason, again, this was about the occupational culture of the IT people. So it helped us narrow it down and building an instrument. So part of the instrument used in the online survey for the quantitative phase was built based on the qualitative phases. So again, there was a reason, was to build this survey instruments. And we started with a focus group, general opinions, then semi-structured interviews. And we already talked about what's the difference, and then more structured interviews. So we were narrowed down to really being able to capture the right words that will describe the occupational culture of IT people as understood and felt by the people, by these young students. What is it for them, the occupational culture? What kind of words do they use to describe the culture? And of course, we had a theoretical framework, but what I'm trying to emphasize here is the sequence of the different methods, and that each of them had a reason, and they feed to the next one. So that was the purpose of showing this figure. So let's move to the next example. In the next example is a focus group. So we conducted several focus groups. So there were 9 focus groups in this particular study. And what I wanted to emphasize from these documents is, again, the protocol. But in this case, it's called the moderator guide. So again, in a focus group, you have multiple people. Say a group of less than 10 is ideal, say 8 people. Because if you have more than 10, that's too crowded, that's too much overlap, some people not saying anything, which you don't want, and somebody taking over and talking too much. Again, you want to balance the participation of the participants. What you have in the protocol is really what the moderator should say. You have the setup notes, what exactly, I mean, in this case, you will see in my example, even there was get the food and refreshments ready, organized and tidy for the room has to be very clean and organized, the position, like we were recording, so you had the video camera in the right position, ready, with charged battery and everything. All these little details seem sometimes, you don't, is it part of the research? Well, yeah, if you're going to use this method, it is, because it could make a big difference if those little things are not ready. So how to set the room, place the name, the names for every participant, so it's easy for you. How are you going to direct to people? I mean, you want to be very respectful to participants, and you don't want to say, hey, you. It's like, okay, if you have the names in advance, then you can say John and Mary. You can direct people using their names the way they want to be called. Then you have things like the voice recorder in the middle. The researchers welcome participants, how you're going to welcome them, even when the moment they start, the moment they come to the room, you are already running your study. I mean, because everything they say, you can influence what they say, so you want to be careful. So the attitude of the researcher starts right there. Then when you start the session, so you see in the sections of this document, the moderator's protocol, you will see the setup notes, the welcome, welcome to an overview of the session, what exactly to say. It's this script. Then you have the administrative details, explaining the participants what to say, what to do, what are we going to do with them? They need to know. And just like in the other situation where I told you, if you're gonna tell them that this is gonna take 20 minutes, do not go beyond. And finally, there you have the questions that are, again, by topic. And I apologize, I see that the time is really, we're running out of time. So let me go to Dr. Linski's examples.
All right, excellent. My examples, of course, you can't read the content. When you download the slides, you may be able to read some of this, but it really is about the format. And so what I showed here on the left of the next 3 slides is my doctoral study, my protocol for my interviews. On the right is my postdoctoral study. Both of them happen to be phenomenological studies. The one on the left was military non-commissioned officer study relating to leadership and morale. On the right was assisting student veterans who have post-traumatic stress or traumatic brain injuries. And so what I wanted to show with the comparison of the side-by-side is that what I have done is formulated a script. It is a script just as if you were on scene with a play. It has the exact step-by-step process for both the researcher and the participant, minus the actual participant responses. And so as you see here, both of them have almost the same introduction, except of course the topic of the study is different. Both of these were semi-structured studies, semi-structured interviews, and they were both phenomenological. They were both evaluating the in-depth experience of the participants. And so anytime that I conduct phenomenology, I can use this. And anytime I conduct an interview, I should be able to modify this script, at least in the general outline. And that outline is really what I wanted to show here. So to begin, of course, the information for the introduction. The next bullet point down is the statement of consent. The way I do it, informed consent, is I have them, of course, sign their informed consent, and then I, in the interview, confirm that they have signed the informed consent. And after I start the recording, I have them verbalize that that consent was approved. And then I always provide a description of the participants, making sure that they still meet the requirements. What has happened is that participants who may have worked for an organization and were eligible to participate, maybe in the 2 or 3 weeks between your last communications, they no longer work there. For some of you, you will, especially in the PhD program, it can take a longer time to provide that data collection in full. In the DBA, it is usually a shorter process for qualitative because we do really focus on a very small sample size. But understanding that your participants must meet those requirements. And if you continue on for the example, this is the actual dialogue. And so I begin the recording, all right, provide the introduction, repeat what date and time that you are collecting this. I like to store my data by the dates and times of the interviews. So just things that help you as the researcher categorize this information later. And then if you continue on to the last slide, you really see how the researcher questions and participant answers are provided in a script format. And so I provided anything that's yes or no, I provided parentheses of a yes or no for the participants. And then where you see those indents, those are potential branching questions. So if they answer yes to a question, I have a separate set of follow-up questions. If they say no, I have a different set of follow-up questions. Those are all things that if you have it all scripted out, it really saves the researcher from the position of not knowing where to go next, how to continue on with the interview. And then, of course, at the end, you have the conclusion. It specifies to turn off the recording. After that, what you don't see is that it specifies the follow-up procedures as well. And so if you're doing a review of the information, if you're going to summarize the details of what you believe you have learned, ask them, your participants, to gain any additional questions about the study. Things like that that really just kind of finalize. I make sure to include all of that in the protocol so that when you are done, the protocol says you are now done, please leave the room, all right, yourself as the researcher. And so you know that you have met from very beginning to very end every requirement of your data collection. With that, I believe we are done with the webinar portion of this, and I believe Daniel is going to take some questions.
Great. Thank you, Dr. Linski. Thank you, Dr. Guzman, for this very informative webinar. A lot of information. And to those of you who pointed it out, yes, you will be getting the deck, because I know there's, especially those last few slides, there's a lot of information in very small font. So you'll get that by early next week at the latest, so you can take a deeper look at that. But we do have several questions already, and I'm going to start out and direct this first question to you, Dr. Linski, and that is, what are some of the most common challenges that one can expect while collecting data for their DSP?
Challenges are one of the biggest concerns of any students, right? We want to make sure that we get from approval to finish without too many delays. And I'd have to say that delays in the process are one of the biggest challenges in the mentality of the students. Because when things do take longer than we expect, we feel that we have done something incorrect in our study. And so one of the challenges is to understand that research is never going to be exactly the same. Every participant's going to be different. The way we access those participants can be different. And my biggest challenge in pretty much every qualitative study I have done is once you get approval to gain access to participants, is the time that it takes a lot of people to respond to requests for participation. And so getting that recruitment information out there as soon as you're approved to do so is one of the key aspects, and really distributing that to as wide a population that meets your study parameters. Understanding that if you do not necessarily meet exactly what you expected to, doesn't mean that your study failed. Just like with quantitative studies, if you find that you don't prove your hypothesis, it doesn't mean you failed. It just means that you know that you didn't prove your hypothesis, or you have a null hypothesis. In qualitative, you may find that what you thought the answer was going to be is not really the answer. And that's actually an excellent thing to know, because you can then publish that or use that in practical application and say, we all thought that it was this, but I have something that shows differently, and I think I can help you. And so really think at how you can take that information and utilize it later. May help some students overcome that biggest challenge.
Cool. Thank you, Dr. Linski. And I'm not sure if you have anything to add, Dr. Guzman. If not, we can move on to the next question.
No, I think Dr. Linski explained well. I mean, my only addition to that would be that another challenge from the data collection itself is that you didn't expect something to happen. And that means you just didn't do enough preparation. I mean, sorry about that, but that means, okay, so preparation is very important. The more prepared you are, the better it's going to go.
Great. Great, thank you. And as a reminder, for those of you who want to submit questions, just find the question box on the control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, and can't help but notice some of the other Trident faculty who are in the audience. And so just if you'd like to share any comments on any of the questions asked, feel free, and I'll share them with the audience. But next question, and I'm going to start this one off with Dr. Linski again, but what is the, excuse me, I'm going to start this off with Dr. Guzman, excuse me, but what is the sample size requirement for the PhD program?
Well, for the PhD program, most of our dissertations are quantitative. So, the discussion on qualitative is usually, if it's a complementing, if it's mixed methodology, then they will have both. But in terms of quantitative dissertations in the PhD program is a minimum of 200 responses.
Great, thank you. And while we're on that subject, Dr. Linski, what's the requirement in the DBA program?
For qualitative research, you really look at 15, and that's the minimum requirement for the doctoral study project. Understanding that 15 can be distributed in different ways based on the type of study, the type of design that you've chosen. And so sometimes it's not always that 15 participants utilize all of your instruments. And so just noting that we do really want to make sure that the answer to that is, until you receive enough information that you've reached what we call saturation. Saturation means that in qualitative research, you're not going to get someone that says anything way out differently than what you've already gotten data respectively. You want to kind of confine the parameters of your study, and if you continue to see significant differences up to your 15th participant, you may need to add a couple of more until you start seeing the same common themes throughout the study.
Okay, great, thank you. And next question we have, and yeah, Actually, I'm going to actually skip that question because I just got another one in from the audience. I'm going to ask this one. And this is for you, Dr. Linski. And so how do you think applied research like this could be beneficial for a master's student, or possibly even one who's considering a doctoral program, or beneficial for someone in the business world?
Well, and that's really the answer is if you believe that you can apply this later. For graduate students or graduate alumni who are looking at moving on to a doctoral program, the biggest difference between a master's program and a doctoral program is that you are now creating new knowledge. You are adding to the body of knowledge, hopefully publishing information based on your study. In a master's degree, we often want you to apply, but you're applying someone else's work. If you want to be a front runner, a thought leader in the field, one of the benefits of applied research is you get to go in after you've completed your doctorate and say, not only have I learned this, I have already gone into the field and done it myself. And that can really be a beneficial aspect if you want to really move into, especially things like consulting roles for executive leaders, you have to be able to prove that you understand the physical environment of their field. And this really helps you do that.
Great, thank you. Next question, this one's for you, Dr. Guzman, and it's a bit longer, so I'm going to try to summarize, but the student's member of several physical and online social networks that are made up of many members who have been vetted by admins and fall into this student's desired target population that they would like to poll. Are there any specific issues with using a service like SurveyMonkey to build an online survey and then to solicit these groups on social media or through email?
I mean, as long as they help you answer your research question, that's fine. I mean, many students do that in the PhD program. It's very common that our students use those kind of services, either from SurveyMonkey, from Qualtrics, or Mechanical Turk. Those are the most common ones that we have seen. And again, as long as they help you answer the research question. So for example, and I know that these services provide some allow you to select the types of participants. So for example, I want participants from the East Coast in the United States, not international, or I want internationals, or I want, you can put those conditions. So the most important is to have the participants that can help you answer the research question. For example, you cannot expect somebody to talk about leadership or say marketing if they have not done that ever. So that's important that the participants are able to give you that information and that you have the required permissions. So now if you're using your social network or if you're using these services, in any of those cases, there is some kind of document that says that they allow you to collect the data. So in some cases, it's just the individual consent. So it's the individual who agrees and says, yes, I agree to participate. Or in some cases, it's the organizations that say, yeah, these participants can participate. Now, again, it's first, they can answer the research question. They can, there is some consent document that will, that describes that the participant is given the permission. And second, this is consistent with your research design and your IRB application. So whatever you are collecting, whatever process you are following, it should have been described in advance to IRB when you applied for IRB permission. So that needs to be, again, planned in advance.
Okay, great. Thank you. Dr. Linski, next question is for you. I'm looking at my upcoming DSP, and I'm intrigued by action research, and I'm wondering if the project I do, which would be at my place of work, by utilizing action research, if this is something that I could carry on beyond my DSP.
Yeah, so one of the best capabilities of any research study, especially applied research, is the ability to continue. One of the things with action research is action research often takes a little longer to implement than just doing interviews, because you have to see how something plays out before you can do modifications, do those cycles of implementations or changes. One of the benefits of action research, though, if the organization approves it, is that oftentimes, if it's successful, they will ask you to continue doing it, or at least assist them in the process of continuing it. One of the downsides of action research that I have seen is, which really goes to any applied research, if it's not as successful in your organization as you thought it might be, the organization probably would not allow you to conduct similar research or additional research in that organization, because oftentimes we do look at success in the organization versus what we do in the DSP, where we're looking at success being measured at collecting quality data and properly analyzing it.
Great, thank you. And let's see, next question, actually that may be the last one. Let me just look through to see if I missed anything. Yeah, that actually looks like we've wrapped up all the questions for this evening. So thank you everyone for your participation, great questions. I'm going to hand things off to Dr. Guzman to close out today's core webinar. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much, Daniel. I would like to again thank Dr. Linski for organizing and for describing sharing his knowledge and experience with qualitative research. Yeah, it's an interesting topic, so we're looking forward to receiving any additional questions that the students may have. And I would like to thank everyone, all the participating, all who are participating today in today's core webinar. Please visit our core website, core webpage, where we have other webinars. The recordings are available there, and additional resources. And at this point, I would like to again encourage everyone to contact us. Here is our contact information. And let's continue collaborating and building knowledge. Thank you very much and have a great evening.